have your face recorded, then please feel free to take your video off. And we'll begin. So first of all, we have a wonderful panel here today for really experienced people from all different walks of life who are going to give lots of different perspectives on the SQE. So first of all, introducing our host, Nisha March, who is the Director of Professional Development here at the Birmingham Law Society, and she's also Head of L&D at Harrison Clark Rickaby. She'll be your host for today. Then moving on to Sarah Ramsey, who is the Dean of the Birmingham campus of the University of Law, Lucy Allen, Managing Director at Barbary Global, Adam Curfey, Senior Manager of Innovation at Mayor Brown, and Joshua Whittam, who's an Apprentice Solicitor at Fletcher's Solicitors. So I'll pass you all over to introduce yourselves individually, starting with Nisha.
Hello, hi everyone, delighted that you're here. I think that the session that we had yesterday for the Employer's Guide to Demystifying the SQE was absolutely super. There is a recording of that, so if anybody wants to have a look at that, we'll be delighted to pass it around to you. Today is all about the Student's Guide to Demystifying the SQE. So as Chrissy has said, please feel free to ask as many questions as you like. There is no stupid answer, and we'll make sure that we get around to all of them as we can. So thank you for being here, and over to you, Lucy.
Make sure I take myself off mute. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Wonderful to be here. As introduced, I'm Lucy Allen. I'm the Managing Director at Barbary Global. So hopefully some of you on the call are familiar with us, but we are a legal education provider and very much focused on the SQE. So any questions that you have around that as we go through the process today, then please pop them in the chat, as Nisha says, and we'd be happy to answer. But good to be here and looking forward to the chat today. Sarah?
Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, Sarah Ramsey. So as Chrissy and Nisha said, I'm the campus dean at the Birmingham campus of the University of Law. We're currently providing both SQE courses and LPC courses. So, you know, this is a really great opportunity to talk to everyone about what the options are, just try and put everything out there in a really objective way so that you've got all the information. And as Lucy said, any questions we're obviously really happy to take.
As I'm me next. So hi, I'm Adam. I'm Senior Manager of Innovation at Mayor Brown. Why am I here then? It's because as part of my history, I used to work for BPP Law School, where I was creating SQE courses. And then I worked at Reed Smith, where I helped them to design their SQE route. And I've never really left behind that training and development interest, and I'm really focused on future lawyers and future lawyer skills. So this is a great area that I've maintained a healthy interest in.
Lovely, and over to you, lastly, Josh.
Hi everyone, I'm Josh Whittam. I'm an apprentice solicitor. I'm working at Fletcher's Solicitors and studying through the University of Law. I've gone through SQE1 and SQE2, so I'm 6 years into this apprenticeship and about to finish. Results pending. Hopefully my experiences can help at least one of you. Any questions, just let me know.
Lovely, thank you very much. So my first question is to you, Sarah, if I may start with you. The SQE came into force, as we know, in September 2021. Can you just tell us a bit about where are we now and what have we learned about the process so far?
It's a great question, Nisha. I'll start off with where we are. What have we learned maybe the whole of this hour? And I'm sure my fellow panelists will be able to add lots of useful things to that question. But in terms of where we are, SQE is now the route for qualification, but I think it is important for everyone to understand that anyone who started or completed or accepted an offer of a place on a degree or a GDL or an LPC, or has even paid a non-refundable deposit prior to 1st September 2021 can still take the LPC and training contract route. So I think the first thing to say is that we've still got both systems running in parallel. at the moment. You know, it hasn't been a cut-off of that's it, 1st of September, it's now SQE and that is it. So there are choices for people, and that's important. We know that we've had the first sit in November 2021. We're told, I think 1,090 students at SQE1. Somewhere over half, I think about 53% have passed both of the strands to that. So there's what we call functioning legal knowledge 1 and functional legal knowledge 2. We know that FLK1 had a better pass rate than FLK2. It was interesting, I was at an SRA event and they don't quite know why that is. They don't necessarily think FLK2 is harder, although it could be. It might be something to do with the fact that people have had to sit FLK1 and then have a very short break and then do FLK2 and they're tired and exhausted. It's hard to say, but we do know as a fact that FLK1 had a better pass rate. Something that's quite important to me in a lot of the research work I'm doing around the awarding gap is we know there is still an attainment gap for SQE between white students and those from minority ethnic backgrounds. And that, I think, is of concern to everybody. Now, the SRA have said they are going to do some research, and they've commissioned Exeter University, I believe, to do some research into that. So again, I don't want to sort of dwell on that, but you know, I think that's something that we all should be very aware of, and we need to look at the reasons why that is and what we can do about that. I mean, anecdotally, we've had some feedback from students. We've got Josh on the panel, so I won't steal his thunder, but we have certainly had some students saying that the exams are pretty tough. They're hard going, they're long, they're tiring, and there's a lot to do in quite a short space of time. And we've also had the first cohort sitting SQE2, although we don't have the results out for that. So that happened in April, and I believe results will be around July, all being well. What else do we know in terms of process? There have been a few issues. There have been a few little glitches, I think, in terms of booking and whether people can get their first preference centre for SQE. You know, there were a few problems about spaces. There have been some issues with results release, but again, the SRA is saying, you know, this is teething problems. We know about it. We're working on it. So hopefully those kind of things will really improve. So I think that's kind of an overview without going too much into other people's questions about where we are at the moment.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Sarah. There's just been some things in the chat that I just want to highlight. So 53% pass rate sounds low. How does that compare to the LPC? And Adam has kindly put in the LPC pass rates for the academic year to 2019 range from 100% to 23% across 25 postgrad schools. Names have been anonymised. So yeah, 4 providers scored pass rates higher than 90%, while 3 fell below the 50% mark. Let me go to the question for Lucy, because it follows on really nicely from that question. Actually, the results of the first SQE1 exam have already been published, and we've got the pass rate. And should those results be a cause for concern for potential candidates? And how do these results compare to the LPC results, for example? So I know Adam's put a bit in there already, but should really, you know, Lucy, should candidates be concerned?
So I think, I mean, just to echo some of what Sarah's already mentioned, you know, we've only had one SQE1 examination so far, and only one set of results, with the SQE2 wrapping up just a few weeks ago, and we're awaiting the second set of results. So we don't have a huge amount of data to go on just yet. At 53%, when you do compare that to LPC, I mean, if you average out some of those stats that Adam shared in the chat, it's actually not too dissimilar. It's around the kind of mid 50% range for LPC, but there is such a variation. And as Adam also put in the chat, like one of the kind of core reasons for the introduction of the SQE was to provide some consistency around the assessment and the examination as well. So I think it's way too early to have any kind of cause of concern. I think that I would just reiterate that perhaps slight misconception that it's lower than LPC, because I don't think the evidence is necessarily pointing to that at the moment. The one thing to keep a close eye on, as Sarah mentioned, with the SQE2 results coming out around July, August timeframe is what that looks like, because the two examinations are very different. You know, the SQE1 examination is multiple choice, based, and the SQE 2 examination is more assessment based. And so looking at how those results might compare would be and will be interesting in due course as well. And also, just to echo again what Sarah said about the attainment gap, I mean, I think that is something to keep a really kind of close eye on from a results perspective as well, because there are gaps and there is research going on to understand why that might be. That perhaps is more of a cause of concern around how that looks for different demographics of students than perhaps the 53% pass rate at the moment.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. That's really helpful, Lucy. There's a comment from Sarah. It's relevant to know that the numbers are relatively small for some providers as yet, and so the SRA aren't wanting to compare until the end of 2023. And I think it's right to wait for the official comparisons, isn't it? Adam, if I may come to you now, what, from your perspective of being in-house at a law firm, and from your experience at Reed Smith as well, what do you think have been employers' reactions to the SQE generally? And do you feel that there's a concern that the standard of solicitor produced from the SQE is different to that of the LPC? And if so, why?
Yeah, thanks. I want to just clarify that some of the stuff I'll be talking about is stuff I learned while I was working for the law school. So I'm not singling out any law firms here if I'm going through some of this, because we did a number of different presentations and quizzes and all that kind of stuff, asking for people for advice. I think generally when it was first announced, we went through those famous stages of starting with denial, where they were like, nah, law firms were mostly just saying it's not happening, it's fine, don't worry about it. Then anger, which is when all the responses came in that said that we hate it and we don't want it. Bit of bargaining as to what could be covered, so changing up that. Then a realization it was coming no matter what they did. And I think that was when law firms, over maybe the past 2 years, have started to say, all right, it's coming, so now we have to spot opportunities. I do think a lot of law firms, there is a gap between the SQE and the LPC because there are no electives. So that has, for a number of law firms, they've sat there and said, well, we usually expect people to have done electives by the time they come to us. So they are creating their own courses to bridge the gaps. But there's also the flip side of that, which is that law firms are taking new opportunities in the way that they structure things. So we've got apprentices on this call today. So, you know, we've got apprentices, and more law firms are taking advantage of having people in and doing apprenticeships in that format. We've got people who are creating new styles of course, doing it more virtually, not doing it virtually, allowing people to do it in a variety of different ways, which I think is quite interesting. You've got more in-house teams that are looking at or are taking on trainees as well, because it's easier to do that for them now because of the way in which the QWE works. So I think employers generally started out really not liking it. And there are some law firms that still have their heads in the sand and kind of go, well, we're creating an SQE that looks exactly like the LPC, and that's all we want. But I think we'll see over the next few years, as some of those more innovative law firms start doing different things, that we'll find a big range of the way in which people deal with this.
And what about the sort of the concerns? Yeah. Do you think some of those concerns are justified, maybe?
So I think some of the concerns I've heard have been about what happens to that analytical mindset and how do we probe deeply. Are multiple choice questions going to do that in SQE1, as Lucy was talking about, the format of the exams? I think there is a gap, but there was always supposed to be a gap with the SRA saying this was the minimum bar. They've never hidden that. They've said that the SQE is the minimum bar of which can you qualify, and it's up to other people to fill whatever gap they feel is appropriate there, and for some that will be electives. So I don't think it's going to necessarily turn in a different level of Lawyer, I mean, speaking as somebody who saw a lot of people going through law school and did it myself, I can't say that I remembered much of my electives. You know, when I got into practice and sat there doing capital markets going, oh, I remember specifically doing this. I think it's more about equipping people with a toolkit of skills that they can apply to practice rather than getting too het up in the exact knowledge of understanding what legislation exactly says for, you know, whatever. So I think we'll see is the answer to it, but I don't think we're going to see a massively pitch difference in the standard of our solicitors.
That's really helpful, thank you. And I will come back to you shortly with some more questions, Adam. If I may come to you, Josh, so you're currently doing an apprenticeship with Fletcher's. What made you want to do an apprenticeship instead of the traditional route? And how has the SQE enabled you to do that?
Going back to day one, when I looked at the application process for this apprenticeship, it was sold to me as a 6-year program where I would do a degree and the subsequent courses, which at the time was actually the LPC. But as we've had this SQE come in, I've done the SQE. I'd qualify in 6 years with 6 years experience. So the traditional route felt as though it was delaying the inevitable, getting into practice, getting that experience. And with more and more people going to university and graduating, that experience really counts more. There's more emphasis on the experience. And as Adam was saying, you take your first seat and your first legal job and you recall things from your degree, and it doesn't necessarily tally up with what you've been asked to do. Education is great, but experience teaches you things that cannot be taught in a classroom. And there's the added bonus too of earning a wage and not having to pay tuition fees, which is always nice. In terms of the SQE itself compared to other potential routes, I've done this part-time. So it's 1 day at university studying degree SQE, and it's 4 days in the office working on real cases, dealing with real clients. I haven't done the LPC, but my impression is that it's a slog. It's a long course. It's not perhaps as intense as an SQE, but you are there for the long haul. And with the SQE, it's shorter, more intense. All your eggs are in one basket. But if you're working as well, you need to be able to allocate your time efficiently. And for me, building up to that first SQE exam, that SQE1, the SQE2, I could spend sort of the 2-3 months build up to it intensely studying rather than having to dedicate lots of time to it over the course of the year. So the apprenticeship was certainly the more attractive route to me because of all the benefits on offer. It just felt as it was the best way to spend the next few years and the start of my career.
No, that's great. And what was your experience, that recruitment experience at Fletcher's?
I've having spent some time here hearing tales of the process of getting a training contract, my understanding is that it was that same process. So it was a whole interview day. It was a couple of group tasks, having to work with people on non-law related things, presentation on, again, a non-law related topic, and then a panel interview. So it was a rigorous process. As I understand it, the same process you go through for a training contract traditionally.
Yeah, and that should help alleviate some of the concerns that people have, that it's just not as robust a process as the training contract, where it seems like it is, doesn't it? Absolutely,
yeah. And it's so competitive for training contracts too. And you routinely see people year after year applying for one and getting knocked back because there's so many people going for so few slots.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you for that. Thank you for your insights, Josh, and I will come back to you again shortly. If I may come to Sarah and Adam, and just coming back, that one of the reasons why the SQE was introduced was to loosen that training contract bottleneck, as Josh has said, which was restricting accessibility to the profession. What do you think has the SQE done, has the SQE done that, or has it just pushed the bottleneck to NQ level? How can students give themselves the best chance of securing a job on the NQ market? So Sarah, if I can come to you first and then to Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Nisha. I think probably the first thing to say is it's probably too early to tell at the moment. We're very early days. So I think we can take guesses about what we think is happening, but nobody really knows quite yet. We had an employer event yesterday, and certainly the view from a couple of our employers was that the bottleneck would be pushed. And I suppose logically that makes sense. You know, you're still going to have people wanting to access the profession. They've got to come in at some point. So that seems logically that, yes, that could well happen. I think probably though let's look at the positive first. I think the way the SQE now is and the way it's structured, I don't think anyone would deny there's potentially more flexibility. There are different ways to qualify. There are, less, I suppose, structured ways of it having to be. So I think that has to be a good thing, that there is more flexibility, and different things will suit different people in different firms, and that has to be a good thing, that we're not all being pushed exactly down the same route. So I think that is very much a positive. I suppose one of the slight concerns that there is, and I've heard this from employers quite a number of times, is a concern that people will self-qualify. So they'll fund themselves through doing the SQE. They'll find different pieces of qualifying work experience, and I know people may well talk about this later, and then say, right, I'm now a newly qualified solicitor. But whether a firm who is advertising a job for a newly qualified solicitor will deem that their particular route, their experience, their qualifying work experience is sufficient for that firm, I think is the problem. So I think we have to be kind of conscious that, yes, this is now a standardized minimum level for all solicitors, but I don't think we should sort of glibly fall into a trap of saying to potential solicitors and saying to students, therefore, the minute you've hit that qualification point, you can go anywhere and do anything, because I don't think that's realistic. So in terms of the best chance students can give them, I think it's probably not dissimilar to the advice we give at the moment, which is do your research. So where do you want to go? What kind of firm are you aiming for? And look at the way they are doing their training. And if I'm being realistic, I think the best chance of getting a newly qualified position is to get onto the training program that the firm you're interested in is offering, whether that be it's something like a training contract. As Adam was saying, people aren't moving very far from the old traditional, sort of structure of how it goes, or is it an apprenticeship, a 6-year apprenticeship like Josh did, or is it one of the new graduate apprenticeships where you do your degree and then come in on a shorter apprenticeship? So I would say it's about doing your research, because I think if we're going to be completely realistic, if you self-fund your SQE and do the SQE prep courses, and your qualifying work experience, for example, consisted of high street and pro bono work, and there is nothing wrong with that. I did family law and legal aid work, but you're not going to walk into a Magic Circle firm in London as a newly qualified, because your experience just won't be the right type of experience. But I'll let Adam add to that.
I don't think there's actually a lot to add. Sarah's done a fantastic job of taking us through. I will say that about the bottleneck, I think one of the, and if I remember correctly from when the SRA was talking about this, which is interesting when we look at pass rates, originally this was intended, the SQE was intended, I believe, to be a properly hard course with low pass rates. And that was intended to remove the bottleneck. And as it is, we've seen it's roughly the same pass rate. So I wonder, what does that do? And again, it's still too early to know, but I thought that was just quite interesting from the messaging that was delivered originally to where we've kind of ended up with those pass rates. But I completely agree with everything that Sarah said. And I think I'm going to talk a bit later about QWE. So I'll go into that in a bit more detail there. But yeah, nothing else to add.
Lovely. Thanks, Adam. I do have another question for you though. How are employers approaching the crossover period they're in now, that that transition period, if you like, and are employers favouring one route over another, and is this likely to change over the next few years?
Yeah, so I think I've heard being the first to jump to the SQE be described as a lot of law firms standing around saying which one wants to jump out of the airplane first and find out if there's a parachute. They've all got, we see every year how many did you take on, how many trainees, how many NQs. Law firms are thinking about that from a retention point of view. They're trying to think about their own percentages. They're trying to look at the pass rates and see when it's all happening. I think you will see more and more firms move to the SQE from September 2022 and then September 2023. And I think that's by September 2023, I think most firms will have moved to SQE. Yes, there is a long stop, which was being talked about, and I think Sarah mentioned it at the start. There is the long stop. We can continue going the LPC route for years. Do I think that's going to be economically viable for a lot of the law schools in a few years? Probably not, because the law firms they work with will have moved on to say, right, we're from the SQE route. And the reason for that is, and having seen this behind the scenes, it's administratively difficult to run both those things, to run the LPC and the SQE at the same time. So I think you'll find most law firms will say, well, from year X, boom, we're jumping. They're not going to do like, we'll do 3 on the SQE track and 4 on the LPC. So that advice, I think, for people is find out what the preferred route is. If you're trying to go to a firm in the next few years, see what their preferred route is. I think right now, it doesn't really matter. They're going to be accepting LPC, they're going to be accepting SQE, even if they've just moved. If they're looking for people that haven't come through their training route, both will be viable options. But I think from September 23, most firms will have expected SQE path and will have tied in certain training and additional training that presumes somebody has done the SQE. And as a result, if you've done the LPC and you come in and you do this little extra bit, you might be sitting there going, well, hold on, that doesn't really relate to the way I did things. But right now, I think anything's fair game.
Lovely, thank you. And if I may ask Lucy that same question as well, how from your perspective, if you've been speaking to any employers, how do you feel they're approaching this crossover period, this transition period? And are employers favouring one route over another?
I think it really depends who you're speaking to. So I've just seen Nicola's note in the chat as well, and I do think some private practice firms are slower on the uptake and are perhaps kind of skirting around the edges a little bit, like Adam says, perhaps using the SQE for their overseas cohorts or for smaller cohorts of trainees rather than their full provision. And in time that will shift onto full SQE provision. I mean, the fact of the matter is SQE will be the only way. So whilst we're in that transition phase, there is, lots of different kind of ways that employers are playing it. I think what's perhaps interesting is looking at some of the creative ways that people outside of private practice are thinking about the SQE, and they are really, when I say that, I mean kind of in-house communities as an example, and they're thinking about how they can adopt the SQE as part of talent retention or talent attraction. And perhaps, to Nicola's point about might it drive a more inclusive mindset, I think absolutely it might. And we're seeing people think in very different ways that support that inclusivity as well.
And can you give any examples of that?
Yeah, so I mean, we've recently started to work with Lawyers on Demand as an example, and they are using the SQE as part of their, talent strategy, workforce strategy, essentially. So they're helping their paralegals on the route to qualification as part of kind of performance appraisals, and if they have employees that are doing particularly well or that they want to retain, they are supporting them with credits towards preparation courses for the SQE. So I think that's a really good example of thinking differently and really investing in your talent.
Lovely, thank you very much. So, Josh, if I may come to you, anything in terms of inclusivity? Have you seen that with other people in your network or your peer group? Sorry to put you on the spot, but it is a topic of mine. It is one of the sort of principles of the SQE to make it more inclusive. Have you seen any evidence of that?
Back when I started, there were 3 of us we got took on back in 2016. Myself, another male my age, and a female who is now almost 40. So there's a difference there. SQE1, a real mix of different people. Lots of people my age, older people, different ethnic groups. When it came to SQE2, one thing I did notice is that I was probably one of the youngest people doing it in my regional centre. I did it at the Manchester Centre. I'm 24, and I was probably one of the youngest there. I wouldn't stick my neck out and say I was the youngest, but certainly one of. People who had, I think people who had maybe started the LPC and not finished, or they completed it and not got a training contract, were now using the SQE as a route to qualify. So yeah, there's certainly a surprising mix of people.
Brilliant, thank you. That's good to hear. And what stage of the SQE are you at now? And what's your experience been so far?
I've finished SQE, so I sat the first SQE1 back in November last year, and I sat the first SQE2 in April, just gone. SQE1...
So you're going to get your results in July?
Yes, I think we're still waiting on an exact date for the release of results. July, August time perhaps, but yeah, a bit of a wait till then. Fingers crossed. Yeah. SQE1, it's, if I remember rightly, 2 days of single best answer questions, lots of different areas of law. You're required to concentrate for a long time. I've done a lot of exams coming up to where I am now, and they're some of the longest I've done. So it was tough concentrating for that amount of time. And you mentioned at the start how there was a discrepancy between the first SQ1 exam, FLK1, and the second, FLK2, and pass rates weren't as high for the second one. There were the two covered different areas of law. So one possible answer is that people don't prefer those areas of law covered in FLK2. The other is that people were just so exhausted from concentrating for that amount of time. They're all knowledge-based, those questions.
And how long was the exam? Was it 4 hours? I
believe it was 3 and a bit hours, perhaps with a short break in the middle, something if I remember rightly. But they're all knowledge-based, so you either know the answer or you don't. There's no using your skills to talk out of it or anything like that. It's just, do you know the answer, yes or no? With SQE2, standing at the foot of the mountain looking at 5 days worth of exams, it looks daunting. But when you're on there doing it, it's not that bad. Especially when you've got through the written elements, those 3 days worth of written exams, it's not that bad because you're using your skills. If you've been in practice, you know how to speak to a client, you know how to write a letter and have a go at drafting things. So it's not as daunting as I thought it would be in SQE2. I think there were a handful of people doing it without having the benefit of a prep course beforehand. I did. I did a prep course. I don't know how they did. It would be interesting to see the stats on, if there are stats available, on pass rates of people who've done a prep course and people who haven't. But I think I'd have found it tough if I hadn't have had the help of an education provider beforehand.
And was it open book? That's one of the questions that's come up.
It wasn't. It was closed book. So the first one was, SQE1 is single best answer questions. So you have a scenario, 5 answers, and one of those is the best answer. And it's not necessarily the correct answer. They might all be correct. It's the best one. And that's the difficult bit because it's not, that differentiates it from a multiple choice question. They might all be right. It's the best answer. SQE2, I don't know, maybe other people on the panel can give insight into the LPC, but for the skills, there's no open book. You're given a scenario and amount of time to prepare, and you deliver, and that's it. You have to retain the knowledge to be able to do it.
Oh, Oh, fingers crossed for your results.
Thank you.
Just some comments from Nicola. It sounds like the old bar finals exam, really tough. Yeah, so they definitely stretch you, don't they? It's not an easy ride, that's
It's
for sure.
not.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Lucy, if I may come to you, does it, for a student, their intended career path, does it make any difference to which route you should choose? Is one route more suited to private practice and one to in-house, for example, or ALSP?
So I think it shouldn't matter. But again, as we've said a few times on this session already, we're in this transition phase, and firms and organisations, ALSPs, etc., will have their preferred way of doing things. So, you know, as we've said already, private practice may still be going down the well-trodden LPC route for a period of time. If you are likely to get a training contract and you have the opportunity to do LPC, that absolutely may still be the best pathway for you. But again, I think Sarah and Adam have said this already. I think really the advice would be, think about where you want to be and explore what they are doing or what they will be doing in the next couple of years, and make your decision based on that. But again, coming back to probably by 2023, mid-2023, we will be seeing an increasing number of organisations and firms specifically really fully adopt the SQE route. So it kind of depends on your timings as well.
Okay, lovely. And Sarah, can I ask you that question as well? That, you know, does somebody's career path make any difference to which route they should take?
No, I don't think so. I agree with Lucy.
Yeah.
I think it's very much, you know, what route is the type of firm you want to go to going down. Because if you're looking to try and pick up at a later stage and you don't get into their training program, if you like, you want to mirror the experience as much as you can. So I think it's just about doing the research. So I genuinely don't think, you know, it matters which way you go.
Okay, lovely. And then just on a similar theme, that if somebody, Adam, if I can ask you this question, please, if somebody intends to go down that private practice route, would they be at a disadvantage on the NQ market if they don't secure a training contract, and choose to self-qualify via QWE instead?
So this is what Sarah was talking about before in terms of when to self-qualify and what QWE you should pick. When I was a law lecturer, if somebody was a self-funder, so they hadn't got a training contract, and sometimes when they had a training contract, they had to pick their elective subjects. And part of the role of the law lecturer was to sit there and say, immigration combined with family law and then randomly doing capital markets is not a great idea for your future, because when you sit down in front of a law firm, you're going to have to explain the reason for those options. And any larger law firm that does capital markets is going to sit there and say, well, you were hedging your bets because you thought you were going to go somewhere else. And the smaller firms and the high street firms might say the same. In much the same way, I think it's worth thinking about the QWE you're going to do, and it's not a race to get there. And I think that's very, you know, it's not just like, oh, hold on, now that, because you can go backwards now. So, you know, I wouldn't be saying there, sit there, go, oh, what QWE did I do over the past couple of years that I could get signed off so that I could qualify today? Because it is going to be, again, that research piece of where are you going, what do they value, and are you able to back up in an interview or in a CV or in a covering letter why you've gone the route that you have and why you've done that. And certainly lateral hires between law firms, I've heard a number of law firms say they're going to have to look a lot more closely at where that person has come from, what have they done, because it's not going to be necessarily the same situation as it is at the moment, where you can guarantee they've all done an LPC, they've all done the same 2 years at a qualified provider of of training contracts and so on. So I think it's going to be an interesting thing. I think another thing to note for those of you who may have or be looking at paralegal jobs and the like within larger law firms is that I think a number of law firms are going to make a difference between you being qualified and you having gone through their training path. So I think a few law firms, especially in the first few years of this, whilst we're still navigating how it's all going to fall out, are still going to keep in place quite traditional training contract structures. And they may say, hey, we know that halfway through our training contract, technically you could self-qualify, but we're not going to treat you or pay you as a fully qualified lawyer until you've done our full 2 years. So those are the kind of things that if I was talking to firms or I was trying to see what they're doing from a grad recruitment, I'd be trying to find out, basically. If you've already got QWE, how are they going to treat it? But yeah, it's basically about thinking about the QWE that you've done and the timing of it. But we're still learning, as we've all said throughout all of this. But yeah, just try and be sensible in the way you go about it and do your research.
Yeah, it's not going to work well for you if you just got anything and everything in there trying to fudge it. Absolutely. You've got to put sort of conscious thought and effort into what you're doing and why you're doing it. Absolutely. Thank you, Adam. Right, so we're almost at the 1:45 mark. I am going to stop the questions in a minute. So if you've got any of your questions, students particularly, that you'd like to ask the panelists, please do put them in the chat. You can, if you want to address them directly to me or Chrissy, please feel free to do that. So I'll make sure that we've got enough time at the end to answer any questions that have come in. Sarah, just a quick question for you. How have recruitment processes changed as a result of the SQE? Should students be doing anything differently now if they're thinking of choosing the SQE rather than the LPC?
I think, as Adam sort of alluded to, I think many firms are still going to recruit in quite a traditional way. Again, if we think about the larger firms that recruit quite a number of let's call them trainees, we haven't got a better word at the moment, they're still going to have sort of quite a structured program. They'll still know what they want you to do. I think what it gives the ability of firms to do is to bespoke their training more so they can do different things, which I think is really useful. But they're still going to be looking ahead in terms of their business planning and recruiting, probably 2 years ahead. I don't think that's going to dramatically change. I think what will change in terms of recruitment, again, is that flexibility we've talked about, so that whether people go for more of an apprenticeship type model, whether they're sticking to something quite traditional, and that's what firms are really getting to grips with at the moment. Some are doing both. I think, again, if we look at a positive from it, I think maybe smaller firms will have more flexibility to now take on a trainee, whereas they might not have felt they had the capability to do that in the past. So I think that is probably a positive. In terms of what students should be doing, again, it's back to that research point. I won't labour that again. We've all said it, do your research, depends where you want to go. I would also say, don't underestimate the work that's needed, whether you go down an LPC route or an SQE route. I think, and I think Josh has probably put this myth to bed, but there seems to be initially some kind of perception that, oh, well, it's just some multiple choice questions. But, these are tough. They're long and they're tough. And quite frankly, unless you're really good at those type of questions, or you have done a course and done a course properly, where you've done all of your revision and your mocks and your we're all talking about the different apps and question banks and all of these things that are on offer, whichever course you pick. So what we're finding already at a very early stage, and I'm sure Lucy would back it up, is that the students who are really engaged and do all the things that they need to do are doing well and passing. And students who do not engage are not just going to be able to turn up and sit those exams and expect to pass. And the amount of black letter law that's in them, you've got to have that background. And I think Josh alluded to this as well, that, to try and do it without I think some kind of proper preparation, unless you're a truly exceptional person, I think could be really, really tough. So I would just say, don't underestimate SQE, I think, for students.
That's brilliant advice. Thanks, Sarah. Before I hand over to you, Chrissy, because I can see some questions in the chat function, just a final few words from Josh, if I may. So as somebody that's, you know, a current student, I know you're almost there at the end, but what advice or what are your top tips to people or to aspiring lawyers that are currently deciding if this is right for them? What would be your top tips? So some great tips from Sarah and Lucy and Adam already. Don't underestimate the SQE. What else from you, Josh?
If you're someone that has a particular firm or a particular sort of niche area of the market that you really, really want to do, I would echo many of the things that have been said already. Do your research, see what's happening in that corner of the market, and speak to people, see what their opinion is. If you're someone who just is interested in law and you want to be a solicitor, I would advocate for the apprenticeship, certainly, whether it's the level I came in at, or if it's at the postgrad level. I think that offers many benefits, the experience and the qualifications all in one. If you're at the stage where you're wondering about LPC or SQE and you just want to qualify, the SQE isn't easy, but if you've been in practice for a few years, it might be the quicker route. It's just make sure you study, pass the exams, and you could qualify. With the LPC, it's well established. You know what you're up against. There is still some degree of uncertainty, unfortunately, with the SQE because it's so new. But with the LPC, there's the added worry of trying to get a training contract afterwards. So it depends who you are. If you want to do a particular thing, do your research. If you just want to be a solicitor and you're not too fussed about which area of practice you go into, if you've got a few areas in mind, I think you've got a lot of options open to you.
Lovely, thank you very much. Over to you, Chrissy.
Thank you very much. What a really engaging session. Thank you so much for exchanging all of those insights with us. I think all our students have found those really, really helpful. We've got quite a few questions in the chat, actually. We've got 10 minutes left, so we'll just see if we can get through some of these because some of these are quite important. So question, first of all, from Georgia. As founders still offering training contracts, could you essentially do the SQE and apply for a training contract to ensure you have the right QWE, or are they strictly for the LPC route? I think I know the answer to this, but I'll put that out to anybody who wants to answer.
I don't think it would be called a training contract. I think firms are going down the route, aren't they, of either they're designing their program with QWE incorporated and the SQE, or you've done the LPC and it's a training contract. So maybe it's just terminology, but no, I don't think you would do it that way, is my view.
Would you agree with that, Lucy?
Yeah, I agree with that. It may just be terminology, but I don't think it puts you at an advantage, if that's the question as well, to do that.
Yeah, I think that's right. Has that answered your question, Georgia? Feel free to, if we haven't got that right, feel free to clarify in another message and we'll come back to you. Next question is about funding, which is always an interesting question. Are there any funding options for students who want to do SQE prep courses / exams and pay for it themselves? Again, I'll put that out to anybody who wants to chime in.
Maybe Sarah and I can each try and answer that. I mean, just if we get provider specific, then yes, we do have funding options for people that want to self-fund their way through and financing services as well. But it will likely be specific to the provider as to what extent of the offering they can provide. But Sarah will have more colour from you, Laura, I'm sure.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I suppose from our point of view, I mean, obviously there are sort of loans and self-funding options in the usual way. I suppose just to say that if you do, for example, an SQE course that's packaged up with what we call a master's wrapper. So we, for example, have an LLM that incorporates SQE1 and SQE2. And that is then eligible for the student master's funding if you haven't already taken that for a master's qualification. So yeah, there are different funding options available.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just chime in there as well, because I think because of the way the SQE is structured, i.e. it's in multiple different parts, sometimes you might secure QWE with a firm who offers you a role that says they don't offer kind of funding or support for the SQE. But for example, if you begin your paralegal role, you build up a good relationship with them. That's not to say that they won't necessarily decide to fund you later on. Obviously, I wouldn't rely on that assertion from them, but it's not an impossible scenario that you may get funding for some parts of the SQE further down the process. So you may have to, for example, fund SQE1 yourself, but then you may secure funding for SQE2 and a prep course further down the line as you build up more qualifying work experience and build up relationships with employers. So that's sort of a bit of a contrast from the LPC in terms of you don't have to pay for the whole thing up front. It is split, and you can sort of split it differently depending on what suits you. Next question. If I qualified as a solicitor through the LPC and training contract route, then tried to change law firms in the future when the LPC has been phased out, would I be disadvantaged in terms of my employability compared to my peers who have done the SQE route? Again, I think I know the answer, but
that's a quick no.
No.
No way. Yeah. It's one of those things, right? People care about your GCSEs until you've done A levels. People care, oh, whatever. People care about A levels until you've done your degree. People care about your degree until you've got into work. People, once you're into a law firm, it will be about where did you qualify, what practice group are you in, rather than looking back to see if you did the SQE or the LPC.
Yep, resounding agreement there. Anything from anyone else? No.
Just agreement. Yep.
Yeah.
Just echo that.
So we've got quite a long question up next. I'm just trying to pick out the kind of relevant part of the question, so just bear with me for a second. It's from an international student who is
so while you read, I've read some of this and I can answer a little bit of it.
Thank you.
One of which, I think one of the questions is that the legal team are not recognizing QWE. I will just say that the QWE, and this is one thing I've found that law firms have struggled with, and it's a more general issue, is that you don't get to say whether it's QWE or not. If it matches what the SRA describe as QWE, it is QWE. If you have the opportunity to develop the skills that are in the solicitor statement of competence, then it has to be signed off. I've encountered a few lawyers who have said, well, what if they're not very good? And what if I don't like the work that they've done? Tough. You don't get, it's the level of attainment is judged by the exam. That's why the SQE is there. All that's being signed off with QWE is that you had the opportunity to do it. So I think that was part of the question. I think there were some more bits later, but I just thought I'd do that one while you read.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And I think the question... I just
realized they're not in Dubai, and they're just on holiday in Dubai.
Yeah. I think my eyes automatically went there, and I thought you were, an international student. I think the rest of the question just asked for some general insight on gaining relevant work experience and the roles that you can apply for. I think that also raised an important question about kind of what the definition of QWE is and whether there are certain roles that will meet that, because that's a question I get asked all the time. I've applied for this role, is this QWE? And I'm sure all of you will chime in on this as well, but it really is, it's not about the title of the role, because so many different businesses and law firms call different people different things who are doing different jobs. So there is kind of no standardization across that process. So it's really about looking at the job description, and perhaps if it's not clear from the job description, if you go to an interview, sort of pulling out these questions as to whether what you're doing matches what is on the SRA website in terms of the criteria. And if that matches, as Adam said, it is QWE, regardless of whether the employer knows it's QWE. I've often had situations where an employer's turned around and said it's not QWE, and it absolutely is. So, it's important to know that it's really about the substance of the role and not the title. And also the role doesn't have to match every single one of the criteria. You don't have to have every single placement matching every single one. As long as you've got the criteria by the end of the process, then it can be made up in up to 4 establishments. But I'll hand over to the panel now to add to that, if anybody's got anything to add to that.
Sorry, I've got somebody cleaning my windows and I've left the window open and he's just squirted me right through the window, which is why I just made a face. Sorry, I wasn't making a face at what you were commenting on, Chrissy.
Luckily I wasn't, I was looking at you, so thanks for clarifying.
I think the only thing to add, Chrissy, and again, this came from an SRA event the other day that I went to, they did say they were going to have a helpline for trainees if someone was refusing to sign off QWE. And they were very clear, as Adam said, you can't refuse to sign off a factual, they worked here, they did this, they had the opportunity to have exposure to these competencies during these dates. That's just a factual question. It's not about whether we liked you or we would employ you or the quality of the work. So yeah, whether that's right or not is a whole other discussion that we won't get into today, but that is what it is.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I just want to pick up on the end of that question, which is about opportunities abroad. So again, absolutely, as long you can use opportunities abroad as QWE, as long as the competencies match, you can use it as QWE. Obviously, the slight snag there is that you have to have it confirmed by a solicitor who is on the roll in England and Wales. It doesn't have to be a practicing solicitor, but it has to be someone who is on the roll, and that can create, you know, slight difficulties logistically if there isn't somebody there to kind of who is admitted on the roll here to approve it. So that's the only thing to bear in mind. You can use it, but you just need to find somebody to sign it off, you know, as per the criteria. So I think just one or two more questions. Do you think it's better to try and get work experience in firms before starting the PGDL course, or wait until I've started studying?
I don't think you miss out. Oh, sorry, Sarah, go on.
I was going to say, I don't think it particularly matters. It depends whether people will take you if you've got no legal knowledge at all. But what I would say is that once you've started GDL, your provider's careers service is going to be able to help you find those opportunities. So what you might find is it's far easier once you're on a course to know what the opportunities are and to have help in applying for those opportunities. Because, for example, I know, you know, we get loads and loads of, you know, vacation schemes and work experience opportunities that we can advertise to students. And I think when you're trying to just find them on your own, that's pretty tricky. So I think my advice would be start and take full advantage of whichever provider you go to in their career service.
Yeah, and I think I was just going to say about one of the big areas that's missing in a lot of lawyers is business knowledge. Remember, the clients of lawyers are businesses. So if you can get business experience, you know, even if you're not going for law experience, any experience of the workplace and how these businesses function, in understanding that a law firm is a business itself, so the way it functions has to make money, etc. All of that is really useful, because knowing the law is one thing, but you've got to deliver that legal advice to a client, and those clients are businesses and they have their own business concerns. So any experience that you can get, I think, is all useful and can all go towards that story of qualifying.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And, you know, I was going to say exactly the same thing in terms of, you know, I think as a baseline point, there's no, you know, it's never too early to try and get some kind of experience. And, you know, there's no harm in trying to get kind of shadowing opportunities and you know, more lower level opportunities before you start. But I think, you know, what Sarah said is absolutely right. There's a huge amount of support at your educational provider for finding you those placements. So yeah, don't be too concerned that you won't get any. So we're coming to the end of the session. I think that is the end of the questions, which is great because we're bang on time, and I know everyone's got busy days ahead of them. So just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of the panel for giving up their time, and everybody else who's joined today. Hopefully you have found that useful. We will be circulating the recording, so if you missed some of it, joined late or anything like that, you will have a chance to catch up. And, you know, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have if you think of something afterwards. So feel free to DM me or send me an email if you want to. So once again, a huge thank you to everybody involved, and looking forward to the next set of events.
Yeah, thank you very
everyone.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.